there's so much stuff going on. You know, so one of the main concerns I'm hearing with everybody is that they don't know when the election is. They don't know who's running. They don't know what's going on. And so I wanted to sit down, talk with all the candidates, let everybody know that there is an important election coming. There is plenty of people running with a lot of different ideas. So Clay, tell us about yourself, and tell us why you're running for Congress.
Well, I am a native Mississippian, originally from Bay St. Louis, raised there, born and raised there. From there to Mississippi State, from Mississippi State to Jackson, where I had a partner and we ran a small business for about 9 years. In 1990, I came back to the coast and went to work for the Hancock Bank and had a wonderful 31-year career with them, and retired to actually run for Congress. And very good question of why am I running? Because I'm not a politician.
Yeah.
I've never run for anything in my life. I'm a businessman, and I think that's sorely lacking in Washington now. But there are a couple of things that before I was approached by folks in the business community that I respect greatly last year to consider running, there were some things that I was getting disappointed with our current congressman.
Mm-hmm.
He, from what I see and from what people around the district see and tell me regularly, he's very rarely seen in the district.
Yeah.
He is right now because it's election time, but the other 18 months of the year, he's not seen very often.
Mm-hmm.
And I really don't know how you do this job without coming home and being in the district and hearing what people have to say, what's on their mind, what are they concerned about. You can't do that from Washington.
No.
So I had some concern there, and it's just recently been demonstrated, something I feared, but it was just a report that came out in the last couple of weeks that Stephen has got one of the worst records for attendance voting of any Republican in the entire House of Representatives.
Oh, wow.
He voted by proxy, which meant he was not on the floor. He gave his vote away 66 times in the last Congress. And to put that in perspective, the other two Republican congressmen from Mississippi missed 0 votes.
Wow.
Either of them, 0 votes. So begs the question, if you're not in the district and you're not on the floor voting, where are you and what are you doing? So those things started, and then the one that got me the most was his ethics issues that the House committee that investigated him said there was substantial evidence that he had violated ethics rules of the House of Representatives, and I frankly find that embarrassing to the people of South Mississippi.
No doubt.
The least you can do is follow the rules.
Yeah.
And those 3 things really bothered me. And then when folks started calling me, asking me to run, I took it very seriously and ended up where I am today.
Well, I'm glad you talk about the ethics complaints and that situation, if you will, because my next question is about corruption. And frankly, I think that there's so much distrust in government these days. There's so much distrust in media, and I think corruption plays a big part of it, because regardless of what side of the aisle on, if you have to have good faith that your government is acting in the best interest, regardless of what direction or anything they may be. There's a sitting congressman running for Senate, and I can't remember what state he's in, Mo Brooks, and he talked about a pay-for-play scheme where essentially the congressman, in order to get on committees, you have to pay $1 million or so to the party to get on the committee. And of course, it's the special interest that flipped that bill, and obviously, that bill comes with some strings attached. And so that's just one of the examples of corruption. But can you talk to me about not only your opinion on what needs to be done, but how did it get this way?
Let me start with, I made a living for 31 years in an industry that trust is indispensable, because bankers are taking care of people's money. Mm-hmm. And if they don't trust you with their money, they don't leave it with you. And one's integrity counts for a great deal.
Yeah.
So I'm very comfortable in sitting here telling you my reputation and my integrity is stellar, and probably because of my career. I wouldn't have been a bad guy otherwise, but that field requires it in a big kind of way.
Right.
If you're not, you don't have a job. Now, to your question, since I have not been inside the halls of the House, I don't know firsthand what those things going on. Now, you mentioned pay for play, and I am keenly aware that representatives are, and I'm not sure required is the right word. It could be, but are required to raise money for the party that then distributes that money to candidates. And part of the payback of doing that is committee assignments.
Sure.
And that's kind of the golden egg, is what committee do you get on? And that is one of the sad aspects. It should be what committee can you do the best service for your country on.
That would make the most sense.
Yeah, not where'd you raise the most money, and that means what committee you're going to get on.
Yeah.
Now, I don't have any facts to use for you today. We certainly could get some, because I know they're out there, but there are numerous examples of congressmen who have gone into Congress with fairly small balance sheets and come out of Congress with very large balance sheets. I have joked with people from time to time that I would love to know who their stockbroker is, because I'd like to put my money with that stockbroker.
Yeah, no kid. Well, there actually are people that follows the stocks movements of Congress and just mirrors it.
Yeah,
might as well, right?
And since I don't know the facts to be quoted on them, but what I do know is the appearance is terrible.
Yeah,
and for a lot of people, that appearance becomes reality. And I think that's part of why the trust is gone, because of the appearance of impropriety. And there's plenty of things to look at to give you that appearance.
Yeah.
And there's some things that can be done. I was in a meeting the other day that one of the ladies in the meeting asked me what I thought about putting all my assets in a blind trust, so that I would not be tempted to call my stockbroker and say, I got a tip
move
on
this, move that.
Yeah, buy this, buy that. And I told her that didn't bother me in the least, if that would make my constituents comfortable.
Right.
In fact, at this point, I've got 6 kids, and they're all now very gainfully employed and taken care of, but I want to leave them something when I go, and I have already taken that out of my control, not even being a politician, and put that in a trust for their benefit that I have no control over today.
Good.
If that's what makes the constituents comfortable, that doesn't bother me.
Yeah.
And as far as the media goes, I think there's a huge amount of distrust in the media because they continue to get it wrong, if you will. And the average guy watching the news, if you switch between Fox and CNN, you have to say who's telling the truth, because they're both saying the exact opposite of each other.
Yep.
So it makes the average person say they're both lying. That is a natural conclusion when they're that far apart. I think there are still some media outlets that are impartial and reporting the news, but not the major sources. And both sides are guilty.
What is there a source that you usually go to, or a website or app platform?
For my daily, just what is a quick read, what's going on today, I subscribe to a service that's free called Axios. AXIOS. And they've got several different. They've got one version that deals with just technology. They've got one version that
finance and business.
Different that are more focused, but they're general daily. It's a quick read, and they cover all the relevant topics. And I have found them. I've been subscribing to them now for well over a year, probably a year and a half, and I have found them to not be biased and report the news. Now, I watch both Fox and CNN, so I can hear both sides of any given story, because you can count on the fact they're not going to be the same.
For sure.
So I try, and I'm a conservative, so I am somewhat biased because of my conservative values, but not so much so that I don't want to hear the other side, because I want to try and understand, even if I disagree, I want to try and understand where are you coming from, because that's very helpful to me. And I believe it's fine for me to disagree with you, but help me understand where you're coming from, and it's fine for you to disagree with me, but listen to me explain my thought process in this.
Right, and that's so important, because at least understanding where somebody's coming from and how they got there, that's half the battle, because these days everything's so divided. Just trying to meet in the middle is impossible, because we can't understand where each other's coming from.
Correct.
And so I'm glad to hear, and that's important to get sources from, to have a lot of different sources, to hear things from different perspectives, from different sides of the aisle, even though it may not be consistent with what you may believe. You can make the most informed decision.
Well, and in all likelihood, the person on the other side of the aisle will point out something the way they see it that I will say, I didn't think about it that way. Now that you've told me that, your position makes more sense. I may still disagree with you, but I got a better understanding
of the issue
of where you're coming from than for you just to be way over on the left and I'm way over on the right, and we're not going to talk. That
doesn't help anybody.
That's why we've got the gridlock we've got now. And I use the example, I had a fun time with it last night because my audience was much older last night, that I asked people, do you remember Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill, who were diametrically politically opposed to each other? But in their day, when one was the president, one was the Speaker of the House, they could sit down and drink a whiskey, tell each other their perspectives, and come to a solution that moved the country forward.
Well, that was the John Adams and Thomas Jefferson.
You're exactly right.
That goes back.
Totally disagree with each other, but could sit down, they're probably having a beer, and say, we completely disagree, but how do we find some ground to move the country forward?
We're on the same team.
Yes, it's not for you to win or me to win, it's for the nation to win, and how do we move this thing forward?
So my next question is about the Mississippi Medical Cannabis Act that recently passed. It's less about the Cannabis Act in Mississippi and more about the federal government's role. Because as you know, there's kind of a movement, if you will, to legalize cannabis, whether it be medical or recreational, throughout the countries, and different states are doing different stuff. Mississippi has a medical cannabis program that is good. There's a lot of stuff in there that I think is better than in a lot of states, but some things that I think we need to change. But that's part of having different states, letting this state do this state do that. So I'll say all that to say, where do you see the federal government's role in this? Because currently we have a purgatory, kind of a gray area legally around all of these businesses trying to do commerce. And a lot of it is because, the federal government, we're just not sure, are they going to even enforce the laws? And that's the thing, is that some people will say, well, if they don't enforce it, it's not a big deal. But that leaves open a lot of just picking and choosing when to enforce laws. So talk to me about the federal government's role, not only specifically in this program, but around the cannabis industry and states' rights as a whole.
And I can give you a perspective that not everybody has as it pertains to this gray area we're in, and that's the perspective of the banking industry. Our hands are terribly tied in trying to bank a realistic live industry because it is federally illegal. Even in the states where the state has declared it legal, the feds say it's not legal, and quite honestly, we don't have this problem yet in Mississippi because we're not legal, but I'll use Colorado as an example. My banking brethren in Colorado can be fined heavily by the regulators for not only banking the cannabis business, that being the store where it's sold or that grow house where it's grown, they can be fined for banking the strip mall where the business is located.
Wow.
They can be fined for banking the plumber who put the irrigation system in the grow house, if that regulator so chooses, because it is against the federal law.
Wow.
So I've got a real clean view of that a lot of people don't see that problem that in the banking and it's not, we see it for the banker, but it's also very problematic for the plumber.
Sure, because if the banker, sorry to cut you off, but if the banker knows that his risk is higher, then that's going to make him less.
I'm not going to bank the plumber.
Likely to do it, and which means the plumber doesn't have the capital, which means he's not able to do the work, which means the stuff isn't happening.
You are hitting the nail on the head, and if you think about it, there are a bunch of different businesses that will be affected. Again, the strip center where the store is located has nothing to do with selling marijuana, but he is banking a business that is in the marijuana business. Wow. So the far-reaching tentacles of that, I mean, I use plumber. You can use the fertilizer salesman. You can use the trucking company that moves it. You can use anything that touches it from a federal perspective is against the law for bankers. And we are completely at the mercy of a federal regulator who can come in and say, I'm fining you the max because legally, federally, you can't do this, even though the state says you can. So it's very, very problematic for a far-reaching group of people. And another aspect of it that is very problematic that most people don't think about, if you can't bank it, those businesses, the growers, the sellers, have to work in cash.
And that's so dangerous.
It's very, very dangerous because we're talking big amounts of cash. So I'm not in favor personally of legalized marijuana. But at the same time, clearly in Mississippi, the vast majority of voters wanted to see medical marijuana. Okay, if that's what the voters want, there's a part of me that looks at it this way. I don't think alcohol's good for you. I think it can do serious damage to your body.
Right.
But that's your business or mine if I'm going to have a drink or not.
So would introducing a bill to help correct some of that be at least not necessarily maybe a priority, but something you would be?
Absolutely. I would certainly entertain how that bill could move forward. Sitting here today, I can't just tell you, yes, I would support it, because I don't know what's in it. And
that was in the details.
And that's a whole nother issue in Washington.
Sure. When
they're passing bills that are almost 3,000 pages long, nobody knows what's in there. As Nancy Pelosi once famously said, you got to pass a bill to know what's in it. That's just... That's wrong on a completely different scale.
No, I couldn't agree more. Well, changing gears real quick. So you're running for Congress. One of the most important powers Congress is supposed to have is the declaration of war. But over the years we've seen that conflicts and war can happen without necessarily a declaration of war. I think we're seeing a lot of stuff happen in Ukraine right now. I'm not sure where all the authorization to get involved with Ukraine is, but we're getting involved. What's your thoughts on not only foreign policy as a whole, but Ukraine and the whole situation?
Well, I do think that certainly the Constitution is very clear that to go to war, the House of Representatives has to authorize that to happen. We have unfortunately allowed there to become some gray area, and that's one of the ones I don't think there's a whole lot of gray area there. Either the House can do it or can't do it, and we've gotten away from that. Now, in Ukraine, I think, first off, I don't think we have the whole story on what's going on in Ukraine. We are hearing one side of the story, and it goes back to our conversation a few minutes ago on the media, and we are hearing what the media wants us to hear. I don't think there's any question of the atrocities that have gone on.
Right.
I don't think that's the case at all. I think there's a very clearly documented and are heinous. The Ukrainians have clearly shown their desire to defend their country beyond any shadow of a doubt.
And it's inspiring.
It is very inspiring, And I think they need to be aided in any way we and our allies can aid them. And that is most noticeably in military hardware, so they can defend themselves and oppose the Russians. So I am 100% in arming them and teaching them how to use the arms. What I am against is, at this moment, I do not want to see us put boots on the ground because of the experience that we saw in Vietnam, which is a war we could have won if we had let the military do its job, and politicians would not allow them to, and we had the fiasco at the end we had. And we've just recently seen it in Afghanistan, that we could have clearly, had the military been turned loose to do your job, they could have done their job, but they weren't. The politicians held the reins in, and again, we were completely embarrassed by our actions. So I don't want to see us put boots on the ground and engage when the political will is not there to get the job done, because we will have the same outcome again.
Sure. So as far as NATO, I mean, Ukraine's not involved, not a formal member of NATO. Do you think that that's something that should be discussed? How should NATO progress moving forward?
Oh, I think it's absolutely something that should be discussed, not to in any way, shape, or form be perceived as defending the Russians' aggression, because I would never do that. But as we were talking about earlier, you need to
defending against the Russians.
You need to listen to both sides of the story.
Okay.
And you can clearly see where the Russians could get nervous if their immediate neighbor all of a sudden is not Ukraine, but is NATO. Right. They can easily see that as an encroachment.
Well, what about that? I mean,
I don't see it as an encroachment, but I'm an American and a member of NATO. I see it as a defense of NATO, but I see how the Russians could perceive it the way they are saying they perceive it.
So is that something that we should just basically say, well, you're just going to have to get over it, or?
That's a very interesting question. I don't know that we can just say you're going to have to get over it without the conflict getting worse. That's why I think at this point, NATO and America does better to simply supply the equipment necessary and not engage in the battle itself. Because I think we are at real risk if we engage in the battle itself to seeing the start of World War III.
For sure.
As horrible as that sounds, I think that depending on the actions that happen moving forward, that is a possibility.
And it's scary, and as scary as it is to say those words, the reality of that is scarier than saying the words. So,
and it is a reality.
It is.
I hope, from a odds-are perspective, I hope the odds are against it.
Sure.
Needless to say.
Yeah.
But where those, what the Las Vegas bookies would put those odds at, I have no idea.
Not sure, man. I'm hoping the betting odds are heavily against, are in favor of no. What was that? It was Albert Einstein. He had a quote, and I'm paraphrasing, but basically he said that. He said, I don't know with what weapons World War III will be fought with, but World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones. So, and that in and of itself is really shows the somber reality of what we're dealing with.
We will destroy each other. Yeah. No one will win.
No. Yeah, that's a lose-lose.
Yeah.
Right now, what do we? I don't even know what the debt is. Every time I look, it seems like it's doubled or tripled, but government it seems like just doesn't know when to stop printing money. We printed about a quarter of all of U.S. dollars that have ever existed in about a year. Inflation is through the roof. Last time I saw it was 8.9%, but I think that's probably a little bit low. So you have obviously your experience in the banking industry. I'm very interested to hear your perspective. So, what do we do? How do we stop the spending, and how do we get this under control?
Well, that's interesting. You brought up the dollars in circulation. The figure I have heard is there 50% more dollars in circulation today than there were 2 years ago.
Well, I was lowballing, but that sounds right.
You don't have to be an economist to realize what that does to the value of a dollar.
Yeah.
It lowers it, which is a big part of the inflation problem we have now. And I would contend to you the second big part we have, which is government inflicted as well, is our government, under the guise of COVID, pumped $3.5 trillion into an economy that could not swallow $3.5 trillion. So now you have all this money chasing too few goods. What do you think is going to happen to the price of those goods? It's going to go up substantially.
Yeah.
And I don't think the vast majority of people in Washington and the House, when they voted to do that, thought about that consequence, because they wouldn't have done it if they had thought about that consequence. So is the supply chain a problem? Absolutely it is, but I would tell you that the inflation issue is more on acts that the government has taken than the supply chain.
Mm-hmm.
Now, to put things in perspective, because I'm not a fatalist, and you were right, the debt is outrageous and growing at a pace that is certainly not sustainable.
Right.
We were in a similar position as it pertains to GDP and debt. Very similar position after World War II. We're a little worse off now. Debt is a little higher to GDP than it was then.
Mm-hmm.
But we were able to work our way out of it then by doing two things. One was creating a very strong economy, which we appear to have. Some would tell you it's on shaky legs, but it is pretty strong right now. But the second and more important thing they were able to do is refrain from spending money. And by those two things, they were able to work out of the debt situation that we were in after World War II, which tells me we could work our way out of this situation if the will was there to not be spending the money like there's no tomorrow.
So it sounds like the way out of it, at least from that example, is production and less spending.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And I was in a meeting earlier this afternoon, and this conversation came up, and probably the part that is most difficult for me to understand when it comes to Congress and its spending habits and the deficit we are in, I can't for the life of me understand how those 435 people are willing to pass this mess to their children and grandchildren.
I agree.
I've got 6 kids and a grandson, and the thought of what they're going to have to deal with if this doesn't get addressed is sickening.
Yeah. So what about that? Do you think, and I agree, sometimes it's frustrating because I talk to people about the economy and the debt, and I don't understand. Is it just they just don't understand what the weight of what their votes are going to do, or do they just simply don't understand basic economics? I mean, I hate to think that our leaders, the people who are supposed to be overseeing and managing, if you will, our economy, don't understand these basic fundamental concepts about economics. It's scary.
Everybody in the United States, at whatever financial level they are, from the bottom to the top, understands you can't spend more than you take in.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody can run their house that way. Nobody can run their business that way. Nobody can run their city that way, their county, their state.
Yeah.
No. So everybody out there understands that you can't spend more than you bring in.
Yeah.
So how come 435 men and women in Washington can't understand you can't spend more than you bring in? I would contend to you they understand it completely and don't care.
Mm-hmm.
Why else would you keep doing what you're doing?
Yeah.
Now, I also think a problem that I see we have, and it's because of 6 kids and getting to watch an age group that I have gotten to watch for between 24 and 30 years now.
Mm-hmm.
because my kids grew up in a conservative house with a banker for a father, they understand you can't spend more than you take in. But I think a huge portion of that age cohort has never known anything but this is how things work.
You're right.
And they in their mindset is it's always been this way, and it's probably always going to be this way. What difference does that make?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
well, it's true. I mean, I'm 36, and all my life, tuition has been rising, and I'll just use tuition as an example. My age group knows that if you want to go to college, you just go get a loan. There's no the federal government guarantees that loan. There's no no. They don't say no. Right. So if I come to a banker with this phenomenal business plan that may or may not work, and I'm asking for a quarter of the price of tuition, I may or may not get it. But if I go and ask for $100,000 for underwater basket weaving associate's degree, or whatever, that may be a little ridiculous of an example, I'll get it. And so I think that because, from my perspective, the way money, and whether it be governmental backed or not, the way money has been so easily attained by these programs has been a problem.
It's a huge problem. And it's because it's government backed. You are exactly right. If it was a lender looking at that, the question would be, can you pay me back? And if you wanted a degree in underwater basket weaving and wanted to borrow $100,000, I would have to question, are you going to have the ability to pay me back?
Yeah.
And the answer would probably be no. And therefore the answer, will I lend you the money, would be no.
Yeah.
I think to some degree, we have the ability to know what any given career path, what kind of money it will generate. Mm-hmm. And if you want to get a degree in something that won't pay for itself, it doesn't make much sense for the government or anybody else to lend you that money to do that. Mm-hmm. And that might sound kind of harsh. There are probably several things that are going to have to be done to deal with our deficit spending that are harsh. Mm-hmm. This isn't going to be an easy fix. And as I tell people all the time, it's going to be really painful to get our hands around this, but it's not going to be near as painful as if we don't and the dollar collapses.
Right. Right.
That's going to be real pain.
Well, let me ask you, as far as the dollar, as a banker, what's your thoughts on these cryptocurrencies and alternatives? I know it's kind of unprecedented in the Wild West now, but is there anything to it? Is that something we should even be considering?
Well, you can't not consider it because it's being used in such a way today that you can't ignore it.
Right, right.
I honestly don't know enough of the workings of it to have an opinion on it. Mm-hmm. I am scared that there is a money source that is backed up by thin air. Mm. That gives me pause for concern. Mm-hmm. And some would say our dollar is backed up by thin air.
I would argue that.
Yeah. I mean, the answer to that is there's some taxing ability to cover that. There is no taxing ability to cover Bitcoin or any of the cryptocurrencies.
Gotcha.
So that, and I'm not saying that can't be resolved of how you mitigate that. Mm-hmm. Bankers are in the risk business. That's what we do all day, every day. Most people look at us and say you lend money. We look at what we do and say we mitigate risk across a wide platform of areas. Mm-hmm. So there's probably a way to mitigate the risk with cryptocurrency, but I'm not up to speed enough on it. I don't use it. I don't own any of it. And quite honestly, it's from a lack of understanding. I wouldn't invest in a business that I completely didn't understand. Well, because that wouldn't be prudent.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. All right. So my last question is about agencies. The alphabet soup of when you go through Washington of all the departments and such. Over the two plus years we've been going through COVID, it seems like the CDC has been able to Dr. Fauci has been able to kind of rule on high without, much consideration of local authority or state authority or anything such as that. So can you talk to me about not only specifically the CDC, but just agencies in general, and where does their authority and jurisdiction stop, and where does I guess the individual rights of people and states' rights come into play?
In a broad brushstroke, for a vast number of them, they should have no authority. You didn't vote for them. I didn't vote for them. Yeah. They were given unlimited power in whatever fashion that I don't understand to do a job that I don't think they should be doing, because we didn't have a say in who they are. Mm-hmm. We elected our representation to go represent us, and now we have people making decisions that we didn't send up there to represent us and make those decisions. Right. So I am a big-time advocate of pushing that back down to the states. The Constitution is very clear that what is not spelled out in the Constitution as going to the federal government remains with the states.
The 10th Amendment.
It's very, very clear. It's not up for negotiation. Yeah. So I scratch my head and say, how did we end up with all of these agencies? The one that I love to use as an example is nowhere in the Constitution can you find the word education.
Yeah, you're right.
So how do we have a Department of Education with a gazillion bureaucrats wasting billions of dollars? How much better do you think those dollars could be spent if they were pushed down to the states?
Imagine that.
And spent by state departments of education, which I'm not a big fan of, but I'm more of a fan of at the state level figuring out how to spend that money than I am at the federal level.
It's a lot easier to affect the Mississippi Department of Education than the federal Department of Education.
It absolutely is, and that's just one example of that bureaucracy that I don't understand how we let it get out of the state's hands, and I sure don't see how we're going to wrestle it back into the state's hands, but I think we can stop it from getting any worse. Yeah. We don't need to form any new bureaucracies, period.
Yeah.
So, do I think the CDC had far too much control in the last 2 years? I absolutely do. Do I think Dr. Fauci had far too much control? Absolutely do. Mm-hmm. And we're seeing, there's an argument that you couldn't see see the trees when you're in the forest. And in the early days of this,
it got scary.
We were in the forest and couldn't see the trees. Mm-hmm. But as we worked our way through it, I think we stayed in a position that we left CDC and Fauci with far too much authority on our day-to-day lives.
Definitely.
I mean, I'm a believer that I'm a grown-up, and I can make my own decisions as it pertains to my health. Mm-hmm. And if I want to, if you will, risk my health, that's my business. Now, the other side of that is people will say, well, what about the risk you're posing to other people? Valid question.
What about that?
In the early days of the pandemic, I would have agreed wholeheartedly with whatever the method was to keep it from spreading. And the reason I feel that way is I've got a dear friend who is a nurse, mm-hmm. and we had this conversation at length. And she said, Clay, reason you feel the way you feel is you weren't in the hospital watching people die.
Man, that's such a powerful story, powerful perspective.
And it is. And she goes on to say, if you'd watched what I watched, your opinion would have been, do whatever we've got to do to slow this down. Yeah. So whatever that is. If that's wear a mask, you damn well better wear a mask.
Sure.
If that's not going to a public, you better damn well not go into public.
Yeah.
In the early stages, I think there was some value to that, but I'm not sure it was proven in later stages. And I'll use as an example, because you can go back and find the research on it. My stepdaughter lives in Sweden. Mm-hmm. And the Swedes did not close their economy down at all through the whole pandemic. Their approach was, let's take care of the people who are most at risk.
Imagine that.
And make sure they're protected. because that's who it's going to hit the hardest, and let the rest of our economy continue to chug along. And it worked. So
they didn't have as big of a inflation or hit or
no.
not certain what the details.
They did not have the death to per capita. I mean, we got probably the most advanced economy in the world and had one of the highest death per capita rates in the world. So, and here's a small country that's not in that league, took a whole different approach than we did, and who knew whether it was going to be right or wrong when they did it.
Yeah.
But they took a different approach, and it worked wonderfully. They never shut their economy down at all.
Is there anything else that you want to discuss while we're on here? I tried to go through a wide range of issues, but
I'll give you one perspective, and it goes back to when we were talking about Ukraine and war and who our enemies are and aren't. And I think, and this is changing over time, but right now, the Russians and the Chinese know that they cannot beat us militarily or economically. The Chinese are doing a damn good job of trying to close that gap, but they can't beat us on those two fronts, which are the biggest two fronts to beat an opponent on. So they've taken an entirely different tack, and that is to destroy our republic.
Destroy us from within.
Destroy it from within, and they are doing a damn good job of it.
Yeah.
I don't think there's enough attention being paid to that war that is being waged right now.
Essentially, the culture war, is that?
Yes. And it's being fomented by misinformation, by cyber attack, and I'm not technology savvy enough to get into the weeds of how to stop that cyber attack, if you will. But I don't think we're paying enough attention to it, because it appears that effort to destroy us from within is being very, very successful.
Right.
And that scares me.
For sure.
So that just a tidbit observation.
Yeah.
From me.
Well, and cybersecurity is becoming one of those big issues. North Korea, from my understanding, they're basically just taking young children who have a high IQ that they think could be beneficial to them in the hacking sphere later on, and that's essentially. I don't want to quote any specifics because I don't, but and I'll be happy to stand corrected. But from my understanding, they hack and are able to pull in, as much money that some countries, their entire GDP, just through hacking. And it's scary because what I try to make people understand is that, and I like your perspective on this, because the United States has enjoyed a geographical advantage. We got the Pacific Ocean, we got the Atlantic Ocean. We're kind of in this. It's hard. It'd be very hard to invade mainland United States.
Yes.
And so just throughout the history of our country and of the world over the past since the founding of the United States, we've had that. But with cybersecurity, all of these geographical barriers just disintegrate. And they're irrelevant.
Yeah, don't exist.
And so I think that is, and I'm glad you talked about that cybersecurity is one of those issues that, and I'm not saying I'm 36 and I don't fully understand all of it, but I do understand that there is a huge need there that a lot of people aren't fully comprehending.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. It is really a challenging question, especially when it comes to the social media platforms I'm a big believer in free speech.
Yeah.
I think that's what we're founded on.
So are you excited about Elon Musk buying Twitter?
Yes.
Theoretically?
Yes, more than no.
Gotcha.
But I like the fact that he wants to open dialogue back up and hear both sides.
Exactly.
But we've got to find the mechanism, the neutral mechanism that weeds out lies and disinformation. And I'm not savvy enough in that world to know how you do that. But at the rate technology is moving, I don't think we're going to be far away when somebody says something. It can, within a matter of seconds, be fact-checked and know whether that is fact or not. And if it's not fact, it comes down, which would free people up then to speak openly and give their opinion. Yeah. I don't know how to do that.
Where that line?
Yeah, I don't know where that line is, because certainly we can't have. That's part of why we've got the problem we've got now is the amount of disinformation on both sides. Yeah. This is not contained to the liberals or the conservative. It's on both sides.
Right.
We've got to come up with a way to deal with disinformation and at the same time allow people to have the right to free speech.
Yeah.
And I don't know, again, I'm not tech savvy enough
how to moderate that.
How to do that.
Yeah. Well, it's a growing problem.
It's a growing problem, and I'm confident with the speed of technology, we will eventually find a solution to that. Because if you think back, Elon Musk keeps talking about it being the town square. Well, there was a time where people were standing in the town square.
The actual town square.
Town square, actually saying stuff.
Yeah.
And lies were basically not accepted. You could say what was on your mind, but you weren't allowed to lie.
You weren't free from being held accountable and criticism.
Yes. You had to justify what you were saying, and there is no accountability now. And in fact, I think you would agree with me that people are more inclined to say things they shouldn't when they don't have to sit and look at you in the eye.
I agree.
When they can do it over the internet and you never see their face, you never see anything, you just hear their comment, people are far more inclined to say nonsense, to say ugly things, to say whatever than they would never do if they were looking you in the eye.
That's right. Yeah, that autonomy is a powerful thing, and it's one of those where I have mixed feelings on that. If someone is going to kind of get in the ring with me and bash me or something like that, it's like, come on, tell me, be a man, put your money where your mouth is. But I will say that we have to find also a way to there's a line, because I know there are some people who feel like and this is where it gets kind of hard to talk about sometimes, but there are some people who feel like, regardless of why or who, that they feel that they are kind of ganged up on, and if you have a system where kind of the loudest can shout down, or kind of the majority who kind of owns the culture and owns the cultural institutions and such, have the ability to put social pressure on you, there is a bit of well, I don't feel free to express my opinion, and I think we've seen that on both sides, from whether it be somebody who lives an alternative lifestyle, who maybe in the past have not felt comfortable enough to live freely who they are, or sometimes even today, where a more conservative person may say, well, I have a particular religious perspective that I don't feel comfortable saying out loud in kind of the general culture. So it's one of those where you have to be sure that people are being held accountable, but at the same time that you're giving people an opportunity to express themselves without putting themselves in a position of vulnerability.
I think we have a great deal of that in Washington right now with our conservative lawmakers, because they're scared, and it doesn't matter what they say. When they voice their opinion, they're immediately going to be called a racist.
You're right.
And if it's not immediately a racist, it's a sexist.
Yeah.
Or pick any number of derogatory terms, and most of them don't want to deal with that. They don't want to be having to fight the battle of being called a racist. And I quite honestly think that's one of the benefits I can bring to the table in going up there, is I'm not worried about that, because I'm not worried. And I think that stems from the fact that they're worried about getting reelected more than they're worried about doing what's right. And I'm not going up there to make a career out of it. So my worry about being reelected, if I do the right thing, the people of South Mississippi are going to send me back.
Yeah.
And if they don't like what I'm saying or doing, they're not going to send me back. And I'm okay with either one of those. So I feel like that gives me a huge amount of freedom to say what is on your mind, what's on this lady over here's mind. And I think in general, I have a pretty good feel of what is on the mind of the people of the 4th Congressional District.
That's great.
When it comes to, and I'll give you an example because I took some heat on Facebook for it.
Mm-hmm.
When Oklahoma and Arizona both passed legislation a month or so ago to make it illegal for men to compete in women's sports. I posted congratulations, legislatures of Oklahoma and Arizona for passing that legislation.
And there was people that took objection to that.
Oh, there were people who took big time objection to it. But I would ask you, where do you think the vast majority of the voting electorate in the 4th Congressional District feel about that?
Probably with you. Probably with you.
Yes. So I'm not worried about saying that. And
Right.
the people who wanted to call me whatever, I got called all kind of things. I really don't care.
Yeah.
Because I believe it's wrong for a man to compete against a woman.
Mm-hmm. There it is.
It's just fundamentally wrong.
Yeah. You disagree with me, then there it is. That's you have that right.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate your time today. Is there anything that again that we didn't cover that you want to talk about? But also tell the people where they can find you on Facebook, on website. Give us all your social media handles.
You can find me on Facebook. Clay Wagner Campaign. You can find me on my website at claywagner.ms. If you want to start receiving mailers from me, you can get online and give me your address, and I'll start sending you what I send out. You can follow me on my website or on Facebook or on Instagram as well. What I would say is go to the poll on June 7th because it matters, and I hope you consider me on June 7th at the poll.
Great. Well, Clay, I appreciate it. It's been wonderful discussing the issues, and good luck to your campaign.
Thank you very much.
All right.
It's been a pleasure being with you.